If you spend the last couple of years trying out every stretch, strength, mobility, calisthenics, fascia tutorial you can find and your results are okay at best, you don't have a consistency problem. You have a target problem, which with most of the men that I help leads towards a syndrome I call the clicking syndrome. And this is why most men stay stuck in fitness mediocrity despite spending numerous of hours and tons of effort into it. And in this case, I'm going to show you how you can finally escape it. So first off, if you're new to the channel, I'm Tim and I help men who are fed up with not seeing the results and having physical issues by following the traditional fitness route in regaining an athletic, lean and pain-free body in less than 1.5 hours a week by using extremely precise signaling over 2 fundamental physical capacities that we use in how we move. And I want to start with a client of mine who was the premise of this video, and he came to me after doing probably what you've been doing right now for the last couple of years. He tried out tutorial after tutorial, new creator, new methods, everything you can think of. He probably tried your 10-minute flexibility routines, your push-up challenges, your top five exercises to build calisthenic skills, etc., etc. He tried almost everything, and after 5 years, I kid you not, putting in a lot of effort, time and dedication, his results were okay at best. Yes, he was able to maybe do 20, 25, 30 push-ups, and he was able to do a couple of pull-ups, but every period of time where he was working on his own, trying to be autonomous, which is a good thing, by the way, but what ends up happening is that after a period of time, maybe 6 weeks, 8 weeks, he always had a physical issue that kept flaring up, that kept him from pushing to his strength plateaus. And in his case, that flare-ups were around his elbow, but all along the way he also developed lower back tightness that prevented him from reaching flexibility gains that he really wanted to. So as a result of his attempts, he did not see the results and he ended up with more physical issues than he started out with. And that is the most fundamental problem of watching or going onto sort of social media platforms like YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, etc., is that those platforms like YouTube are not designed to fix your body. They are designed to keep you watching. And those are 2 completely different goals, because YouTube rewards that you spend more time on the platform, same as Instagram, TikTok, etc. Is that they just know if you click on this new exercise of this new creator with a new method, that keeps you there. But what the algorithm doesn't know is your current baseline. The algorithm only knows what you're going to click on, but your baseline sets content as just a blob of information apart from actually the implementation of information in towards a process that is specifically designed to you. Because it doesn't know your current capacity, it doesn't know what kind of physical history you have, what your current capacity of your tissues are to meet certain demands. It doesn't know your goal, and therefore it can never know what or how to progressively overload your structure, which is the most important principle for growth. Figuring out where you are currently, what is your current max threshold in skeletal tissue, in your muscles, how much force they can produce, but also their force managers, connective tissue, how they can relay, dissipate, and manage the forces that your muscles are producing, etc. And then also how that complete structure, your physicality, manages all of these. It doesn't know any of these elements. And therefore, it also doesn't know, like, okay, if this is your threshold, how do we stimulate it to keep you growing and pushing that forward? And what ends up happening as a result of that is that because you don't see the results, after a period of time, you click on the next video. If you don't see your pain dissolve, which probably happens maybe for you try to stretch, you see some results, but then it comes back, you come back. And what ends up happening is that you're performing or you're clicking on videos that promote the same movements, same sets, same repetitions, same time on attention, etc. But in these pursuits, you're activating and recruiting muscle fibers and or not connective tissue that kept you in the same situation as you started out. So you never recruit the muscle fibers, the connective tissue, the coherence, the coordination across the system that you actually need to stimulate to progress forward. And that is what generic programs do. They never take you there. So you just simply accumulate a lot of stress, a lot of time on a system and a situation, because stress is managed, stress in general is not divided in buckets by the nervous system. It all comprises or piles up on the same big chunk of stress management, or the container of stress. So what ends up happening is just you keep pouring on a system that is already overloaded, and you never see the results of your efforts. And that is simply just distance, because distance, taking a lot of steps, is effort without direction. So how can you escape this? Well, in the case of the client that I work with, and in the case of everybody that I work with, we create focus. We first start with a baseline capacity, and that is very crucial. And the baseline capacity doesn't have to be very sort of grandiose and sort of with a lot of time and a lot of etc. etc. No, what we want to do with the baseline capacity is we want to know how strong you are in specific parts of force production at the level of the muscles and near end ranges. And then finally, we also want to know how are you utilizing this structure in a locomotive sense, walking, sprinting, running, etc., because that is one of, or those patterns are often the ones that we do a lot. And we want to make sure that the brain and nervous system has that coordinative capacity to control all the moving parts as in one single fashion. So in our case, we use a baseline capacity. We measure upon a couple of patterns, which we already select. So the patterns that you can see here comprise the two fundamental capacities that we always go for, which is building strength over a full range of motion and triggering as much or stimulating as much coordination while we are moving through space. So what I like to do, I'll have people that I work with, we step in, we first know your goal. So what are you after? Are you more into building raw physical strength, or do you want to improve joint capacity, improve the reduction of some pain, sensations, etc.? And then we create focus, which often is a combination of trying to scan or create that baseline of 7 to 10 patterns of these patterns within the pillars that you can see here. So it's either 6 or 3 of these, 6 or 3 of these, and always we're addressing the spine because it's very vital in how we move. So this stops the guessing immediately. Instead of YouTube, hundreds of hours, hundreds of exercise tutorials, clips, etc., now you know this is where you are. This is where we need to prioritize and put all of our focus into, so that we make sure that you progress in the right direction. And as you can see, the majority of the scalable patterns are always around shoulder, spine, hips. They are the vital joints and parts that sort of spill out movements across towards the extremities, which is one we want to address. So if you build capacity in shoulders, spine, hips, you improve your entire structure in ways you cannot even imagine. So what we do there is we have the baseline capacity. We select 7 to 10 scalable patterns. And if you want to know more about the patterns, you can see other videos. But that is the preface. That is the starting point. And then we go into how to approach to make sure that we can increase your capacity, to make sure that you keep growing forward. So we select, and then we proceed forward, and we always have this one element in place. Our main vehicle or system of growth is that we are not here to accumulate stress, which is what the majority of generic programming does. It accumulates stress to only find a very small percentile of total accumulated time where you stimulate growth. No, we actually want to go as close to our max as fast as we can, and we stay there for however long we can, so that we only prioritize stimulating the growth of our maximum capacity in either building strength or raw strength over the 6 patterns or the 6 positions that you just saw in the sagittal plane of motion, or you build it into various ranges of motion at the shoulder, spine, and hips with building end range strength. And finally, with the spine as a whole unit to make sure that we're increasing rotational capacity. But the main objective is that we want to go as quickly as we can towards our max, which means that for building strength, what you can see here is that often you have the aerobic muscle fibers where a lot of people work their endurance capacity. You have the anaerobic type 2A, but we're after 2C. We want to go as fast as we can towards our max, and that is what maximum recruitment does, what maximum intensity training does. If you only prioritize stimulating your max threshold, what you can see is that you work all of your different muscle fibers to push your threshold towards the max, compared towards the other ones, where if you go for anaerobic, you need a lot more time to get towards your maximum threshold. But accumulated time doesn't take into consideration that you also need to recover from it. And recovery is one of the most important skills you can spend your time on, especially in modern age, because recovery also involves recovering the nervous system from the output it delivered, on top of the management it has for the multiple stressors, multiple responsibility it has to manage on a daily basis. So the goal here, with raw strength, is to recruit as much muscle fibers, especially the type C ones, which are very hard to recruit, but they get recruited once you put an extreme amount of load on your system in a safe way, at a very low velocity. So that's why in the protocol that I use, we work body weight training where we use one training variable per movement pattern that we can scale, increase and decrease every inch of the way, every inch of the pattern, to make it extremely hard, drastically decrease the time spent, still stimulate growth, and have a lot more time for the fibers and the nervous system to recover from it. But in this case, we recruited every muscle fiber instead of just a couple or 70% of your fibers, but never reaching that maximum threshold in the way that we want to, where we also stimulate fibers that are just only meant to come out, your ATP system, once the load is extremely high. Because that is also something a lot of people don't, or what a lot of men don't know, is that your muscle fibers don't respond to speed, because that's what a lot of people think. They think like, oh, we have to recruit like the type 2C muscle fibers, and we can only do that by speed. But no, it's meant, or they are recruited through loads, high loads. It doesn't matter if it's how fast you go or how slow you go. If you meet high loads, then you recruit more muscle fibers. And at a low velocity, we're respecting our tissue's capacity to cope or to stimulate change or adapt in a way that we want. So connective tissue and muscle fibers, they like slower loading as a way to adapt towards that stimuli. So that's what we want from a strength perspective. We want to be in this region: high intensity, low velocity, a lot less time spent, and stimulating your max across every inch of a movement pattern. Then for your end range conditioning, what we want to do, where a lot of people make the mistake, is that they go towards their end range, let's say it's this, and they simply stretch in that region. But stretching in itself is not a tissue remodeling mechanism. Stretching, if you go towards your end range and stay there, that is what a stretch is. But it's from the brain and nervous system's perspective, it's simply a sensing mechanism. It's knowing where you are in space. And if you don't stimulate your end range, you're not signaling your brain and the nervous system it's safe to control that range, or potentially give you a little bit more range of motion that you can start to learn to control. So what we want to do is we want to get towards your end range using the stretch. So we're not falsely accusing the stretch for being like, you don't have to stretch that. No, we're using the stretch for how it's meant, for its purpose, and that is to get you towards the area so that the brain and the body, the brain and the nervous system knows, hey, this is where your joints or extremities are in space. Good. Once you're there, you want to stimulate that range of motion with as much contractions as you can. And therefore, if you do that, if you stimulate your end range with high contractions, over time, the brain and the nervous system feels that safe and can give you potentially more, which is not per se the pursuit, but that could be a consequence, a positive consequence of trying to stimulate your end range. And in its pursuit, what also ends up happening is that you're creating buffers so that your connective tissue also has a higher force capacity or force dealing capacity, so they can also manage more forces that being produced from your skeletal muscle and have more buffers. So eventually you're not only working your skeletal tissue to produce a lot of force, your force manager, connective tissue, your fascia, they also get a boost, a bump, get stronger, so that they also can manage forces, dissipate forces, etc., absorb them in a way that is more in line with higher demands. And then finally, maybe one of the biggest ones that you rarely see people talking about is that in this pursuit, we want to stimulate as much coordinative capacity as we can. The brain and the nervous system, they love, that's their, like from a movement capacity, that is their, I wouldn't say sole purpose, but they promote or they stimulate a lot of movement variability. So what that means is that the more synergies, the more combinations you can make in the body while producing force, which happens when you're activating a lot of areas at the body all at once in relation towards the demand, the more you're stimulating coordinative capacity. So if you look at a planche push-up, for example, which I can show you here on the screen, if you look at that, what ends up happening if you're increasing the demand, what you're also doing is you're trying to manipulate your more regions of the body in relation to gravity. And that in itself pressurizes the nervous system to make more synergy, create more synaptic pathways across multiple areas of the body to meet the demands that are being placed on the body. So where a planche push-up or a normal push-up has you fixed with the feet on the floor, the demand is on the shoulder, you're working your chest, your triceps, the front of the deltoids, of course. Once you start increasing this demand and you're starting to take away the legs, you can imagine, you're now also working your transverse abdomen region. You're also working more parts of the back. You have to control your pelvis. You have to engage the glutes. You have to make sure that you also flex or extend the toes to create a enlarged synergy between the entire structure to manage the demands and create force. So this in itself is how you stimulate more coordination, using more districts of the body in relation to space. That's why the scalable patterns that we use are always in favor of trying to work as many districts as we can within a couple of primary joints that we work. And also, we work, for example, the spine, where we work primarily the rotation or the opposite rotation at the level of the shoulders and the hips, in combination with a spinal band through the coiling core. And that is also a way where you work multiple districts of the body in relation to space. So that is the blueprint to make sure that you get out of fitness mediocrity. You create a baseline. You do that by focusing on just a couple of scalable patterns that work a sagittal plane of motion to build just a high amount of force production in, then through end range conditioning or end range training, you're stimulating your end ranges as much as you can so that the brain and the nervous system feel safe, and your tissues, your connective tissues, can also deal or manage high force production that happens at the level of skeletal muscle. And then finally, we also measure your locomotive rotation capacity to make sure that you're moving efficiently through space. That is how you create your baseline. That is how you make sure this is where I'm at. And through all of these exercises, you get a very good understanding if you lack certain issues at a joint capacity, if you maybe have toe mobility issues, if you have knee issues that cannot tolerate well, if you have a hip internal external rotation issue, simply by focusing on patterns that address those joints in sagittal and other ranges of motion or planes of motion. Then you primarily focus on one thing only, and this is the most important thing that generic programming doesn't teach you. You want to come in with the sole purpose of stimulating growth, not stimulating time, accumulated time. Because accumulated time, if you're not seeing results, is just more time on the system that is leaking, that is not working. You only want to come in stimulating growth. And you do that on trying to activate as much muscle fibers as you can at a low velocity for building that raw strength. You're trying to condition and strengthen your end ranges within a couple of planes of motion and range of motion at your joints, and stimulating as much coordinative capacity of your brain and nervous system by working as many areas as once. If you do this, you can work and improve your entire structure in just 1.5 hours a week. And you do this because you have a clear baseline, you have a clear goal, and you have a lot of implementation of information. And that is direction. That is not distance. Now, to help you out, I've got 2 options for you. But first, let me show you a little bit of a result. So this is the client that I was referring to, and this is very interesting. In his situation, he started out with a regular push-up, and in just 4 weeks, he managed to unlock his first tuck planche push-up. And he did 4 to 7 repetitions of this pattern per week. For the one leg squat, he started at a partial range of motion. So we work with a one leg squat elevated for the anterior legs part, so for the front part of the legs. Started at a partial range of motion. Now he works a full range of motion of a one leg squat elevated with added weight. So he's now working at 15 kilos, around 12 to 15 kilos of added weight, which means a massive increase already after 4 weeks in his one leg squat capacity. So that is what ends up happening if you work with an extremely high stimulus for just a concise period per week. And you see a lot of results because you also spend a lot of time recovering, giving the nervous system and the tissues the time it needs to really come back restored, refreshed, also in combination with the appropriate recovery and sleep and nutrients, of course. Now, there are 2 directions you can go for. If you want to know what your gaps are within the mobility assessment, so to know, okay, where is potential, or where do I potentially feel some issues in my structure from a joint perspective, I put together a free mobility. You can download it in the link below. It takes around 5 to 10 minutes, and it shows you exactly which patterns give you the most headaches. And after following it through, there are specific guidelines and maps for the tutorials and the exercise that are selected to make sure that you can also improve on your weakest regions. So you can download it for free below. If you want to incorporate this system entirely for your unique situation and see the fastest results possible, there's another link you can apply, and we'll check if you're fit for the program. That's it for the video, and leave in the comments if you have any questions in the comments, leave them there below, and for the rest I'll see you in the next one.